Thanks for taking a bit of time to chat with us. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Durk, you can check out some of his work. He's tagged us pretty profusely on Twitter and Instagram. Do you want to kind of introduce the type of work that you do, Durk?
Yeah, maybe give a little background. So I went to many years ago. I went to art school where I basically studied painting. And years and years later, I got into 3D. I started as a visualizer for architects and slowly moved more towards making work for games and animations, and now also VR. And in terms of the tools I'm using, the biggest change for me has been actually using VR modeling tools, which is now a Gravity Sketch, but in the beginning was Google Blocks. So yeah, I also make like 2D illustrations for people sometimes, and even then I'm using Gravity Sketch. So it's become like a huge part of my workflow.
Nice. What kind of got you into the move from architectural visualization to gaming? That's kind of a big, seems like a big jump, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I was always interested in basically when you're a visualizer, you're not a designer. So somebody's already designed the house and it's your job to make it look as you can. So you're really visualizing somebody else's design. But I was always much more interested in creating my own designs and, having more freedom because, architecture, it is still very confined. And a lot of architects in the beginning at the first briefing have a lot of wild ideas, but as you get further into the process, they usually want the thing that people already kind of know. So it was really just creative freedom that made me want to get into doing more like concept art and level design. And at the kind of end of my career path as a visualizer, I already started to look at game engines because I had to render also a lot of animations, and it takes so much time, and it sucked really all of the fun out of that process for me doing like V-Ray animations. So I started to look at game engines because already then like the real-time rendering quality of those animations with Unreal and later on Unity became so good that I really felt like this is kind of the future for, well, at least for animations. And then I got familiar with the software. And then when VR came out, I was already kind of set because I knew how to work with Unreal and Unity. So yeah, it turned out that that's the kind of software you would need to know when you want to get into VR, which was kind of an accident, but yeah, came together pretty nicely for me. There's always this first resistance you have when you know all your buttons, you know how to work your 3D software, and all of a sudden you have to do what you want to do, but now do it in VR. So it's always a little resistance, and it even was for me. It wasn't until, so I started with Google Blocks as kind of my main VR modeling tool because it was the only one where you could actually move vertices around and make like optimized geometry for VR. And I didn't really get into that until I got a job to work in that. And then I had to work on it for like 3 weeks. And then I knew all the tools. And so you need to get over that first hump. And you should also kind of, so for me, I needed to get pushed a little bit. But once I was over that, I mean, the benefits were so clear, especially just getting a sense of your geometry, how it feels, what size it should have. What does a house feel when you walk through it? What does a briefcase feel like when you pick it up? These are all things that are so they become so obvious once you started working in VR, and a lot of it has to do with scale. But there are also other benefits that I discovered later on, which a lot of other VR artists talk about as well. It's, for example, the focus. So when you're you put on your VR headset, there's no distractions. You're in the zone automatically. And so many times I put on my headset thinking, oh, I'm just going to do something for 20 minutes. and like 2 hours later, I take it off and I totally lost track of time. So those are really some of the benefits I think that I really love about VR. Okay, so you're seeing my YouTube channel, and there's this one project I did. It was actually a personal project, and it was actually a little. You can see this? This is a little kind of fantastical little garden I made using Gravity Sketch and Substance Painter. So it's kind of like a very colorful science fiction-y place made for VR. And I ended up putting it in VR chat just as an experiment to see how that goes. And it actually became pretty popular hangout spot. So like, yeah, thousands of people have been able to actually visit this little place in VR chat, which was nice. So this is just a little video of the end result. But let me go back. So I made a series of tutorials explaining my workflow, and I'm not going to show those videos in their entirety, but they'd help me explain it a little bit. A lot of people were asking me about the workflow from Gravity Sketch to Substance Painter. A lot of people working in VR are working with, for example, tilt brush or with like vertex color. So they don't go into texturing. But that's I'll get into that a little later on. So yeah, what I really like about Gravity Sketch is that you can really do low poly modeling, which is of course important for VR because you want to have a low poly count. But it really started to become, because in the beginning I was still working in Google Blocks, but the moment I really switched over is when you guys added the subdivision modeling tools. As you can see, that's here what I'm using. I usually start with like a plane or a cube, and then it's just moving vertices around, extruding surfaces, and then kind of depending on if I want a low poly look or more smooth look, I add 1 or 2 subdivision levels. This is really made me working in VR, made it so much faster. So yeah, it's really, a lot of the other tools I don't even use. It's really the subdivision modeling tool, and you can make all the things you do, you know, the loop cuts, add an additional cut wherever you want, snapping vertices together. So here I'm creating some, let me go through it a little bit, creating some assets, some unrealistic science fiction looking trees, and I end up putting them all together. And I'll have a little diorama here at the end, adding some mushrooms. So for example, this is what I end up in Gravity Sketch. So we made a bunch of assets here, and I copy them around, scale them a bit to where I want them, and put them together just to see how they look, how they fit together. But I don't use all of this in the rest of my workflow. So this is just like an intermediate step where I want to see how the thing comes together. The colors are just Gravity Sketch colors. What I do then is I split it up and I just put them in a long line, and I remove all the duplicates because I'd rather have like one flower and then duplicate it and scale it inside of Unity than to export like 4 different flowers from Substance if they're going to be looking the same, because I want to have some efficient use of my texture space. So here I just put them in a big line. Now they still have the different colors. That's just to be able to see what I'm working with. So this is how I export it. And then I export it as OBJ or FBX, doesn't really matter too much. Make sure the vertices get welded. So those are actually the basic settings. And then I go in to 3D at Max. Oh yes, here we are. So they come in in a straight line, and they still, for every color you add in Gravity Sketch, you get a different material, which of course is not what you want, because besides poly count, draw calls are very important to keep low when you're making things for VR. So here I've removed all the sub-materials and just created one material for everything. Just has a generic kind of a purple color at the moment. Sometimes, what I do, I check if all my normals are correct. Usually in Gravity Sketch, it's pretty easy to see that your normals are facing the right way. Sometimes when you use the symmetry tool, it happens that the symmetry part has inverted normals, so you got to fix that in 3ds Max or in any other 3D software. But those are, yeah, kind of basic things you would do with any type of geometry you're importing. Yeah, so now the big part here is, of course, the UV unwrapping, and I think I get most questions about how to do that, because that's really, I think it's a skill that is very important, and a lot of people still working in VR don't have that, and kind of prevents them from making a jump to material authoring software like Substance Painter.
Can you just explain a little bit about the significance of UV unwrapping and how Substance currently handles GS content versus after you go through this process?
Well, of course, UV unwrapping is you have to do that. You want to create materials for your models, and what's great about Gravity Sketch is that, especially if you're using the subdivision modeling tool, you get pretty good edge flow. So the edge flow makes sense. In contrast to, for example, if you export a model from Oculus Medium, which is voxel based, you're going to export it. It's going to be very high poly, and it will poly crunch your models, but your edge flow will be terrible, and you can't really do any UV. So for a model like this, if I want to select the seam, I just select this seam, and it will automatically make a loop. And then sometimes by hand, I have to adjust it a little bit. But being able to do that is very important, because your UV seams, so the parts where your texture basically gets cut, those are the areas where you can run into trouble when you, under certain lighting circumstances, you can see normal maps not working great, or maybe you'll see some tiling issues in your texture. The fun thing, what I've kind of discovered, because Gravity Sketch has pretty good edge flow, for the latest experiments, and I will show you after this, I started to use the Substance Painter Auto UV feature, and it handles it pretty well, actually. I have to say, it seems to be geared more towards organic subject matter. So when you have like an interior or furniture, it doesn't really work that well. But for a creature or like trees, something like this, you get pretty good results. But I think we can talk about that when I show you some of that work. Yeah, so that's why it's important to create good UVs and always know how to do it by hand, because the automatic UV creation is not always going to cut it for you.
Durk, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So when you're creating in Gravity Sketch and you're keeping mindful of the edge flow, are you also almost like pre-planning where you're going to grab your seams to kind of create the UV map?
Yeah, interesting. Maybe, and I don't really think so. No, it's really just when you have a good edge flow, it's almost evident where the cuts are going to be. Like when you you always want to make those cuts in the areas where you don't see them, like parts where there are like the bottom part of something or the backside of something. But the problem with VR is you want to make something that's going to look good from all angles because people can really examine it. So there are going to be cases where you're just not going to be able to hide. And so I had to kind of accept that. For example, you have these little balls here on the top. What I would do, just select these three and then loop them. And then, it would create seams like in a T shape. But there's no way to hide those seams. So no, I think just building it in an efficient way automatically creates a good edge flow. And then after that, it becomes kind of evident where you want to, like best case scenarios for the seams, because it'll never be perfect. And especially because a lot of times I reuse the same UVs that I use for materials. I use them also for light mapping in Unity. It kind of depends on the use case, but if I've already made them correct for the materials, I know kind of what I'm gonna expect when I do the lighting. So that's another good reason to be able to create your own UVs. There's in Unity you can have like create auto light mapping UVs, but a lot of times there are little errors when it tries to calculate those automatically. So
cool.
Yeah, I'll scroll to this a little bit more, so you can see some of the places I put some seams. So for example here, it's not a perfect solution, but what I always try to do is create as little separate parts, little UV islands in the UV map as possible. So if I can keep it in one shape, which also makes it easier to kind of recognize it once it's in Substance Painter and to see, oh, this is that rock. A lot of automatic UV unwrapping, they just take like an angle of 45 degrees and then break everything up. And then it gets scattered with a whole bunch of small parts. So yeah, that's another reason to kind of work efficiently. Basically, I've unwrapped the whole thing. There's this one extra step I have to do in 3ds Max. I have to first connect all the geometry together, then do the UV mapping, and then split it up into different parts. I'm not sure why, but that's kind of how I have to do it. So here I'm splitting it up in all these different parts. And so that's the 3ds Max part. Then I import it into Substance Painter.
For my colleagues on the call that aren't familiar with Substance Painter, you mind just giving us a quick 30 seconds of what is Substance Painter and why is it used in your workflow?
Yeah, well, Substance Painter is a dedicated material authoring software. So you import your 3D model and you can create basically textures, specular maps, normal maps. And the great thing about it, it's just dedicated to creating materials. So in the past, I would create my materials in 3ds Max or in some other software. But Substance Painter is really just to create materials. And what's great about it is that you can paint across several channels at the same time. So maybe you want to add a height map, but you also want to add some yellow to that same channel. And you can just paint across all these channels at the same time. And they all get baked into one texture. So for example, here you see the collection of trees. I could have one be wood, one be metal, one be self-illuminating, and still all come from the same texture, which means that I would have one draw call for all these assets, but they would look like they're completely different materials. So especially for VR, where I mentioned like draw calls have to be kept low, I can't recommend Substance Painter enough. And there are some other pieces of software that are similar, and I'm sure they're great, but
what I find interesting here is that the colors from Gravity Sketch are essentially pointless by this stage. you know,
Yeah.
you need for the color whatsoever. You're just dealing with the geo.
Yeah, it's just a geo because, as I mentioned, the materials exported from Gravity Sketch become like different materials, and you need to all have, you just want one material. Because if you put this in a scene with a bunch of other assets, you know, your draw calls are gonna, because every material is its own draw call, so you could very quickly become very inefficient. I mean, the Gravity Sketch colors, I still need them just in Gravity Sketch to have just a clear idea of kind of what I'm doing, and kind of see the differences between the different objects. But yeah, that stuff does get lost. I mean, I'm pretty sure there are ways where you could export that color map and merge it into like one texture map. But I've never, like, my workflow is really think about the geometry, and then once I start with the materials, I just let in a whole bunch of new ideas. So kind of let go of what my initial color scheme.
Yeah. But I guess what I like about it is that it's the color in this situation is actually just being used as an aid in Gravity Sketch. It's just an aid to help you distinguish certain things or see how something sits next to each other in terms of contrast, as opposed to, you don't need to carry it all the way through the process, which I find quite nice. It's almost like a tool.
No, it's definitely, and it's a very good tool, and it you know, makes a lot of sense for me. It's also much nicer to work in a scene with some color than when everything is just gray. I also do it in, so sometimes I have like bigger models. So for example, these assets all get baked into one texture, but sometimes you have a bigger model. You would still have a subset of like 5 or 6 different materials within the same model. And then even in, or sometimes in Gravity Sketch or in 3ds Max, I give those different parts like very distinct colors. So one is blue, one is purple, one is yellow. So when I import it into Substance Painter, I can very quickly see what the different parts of the object is. So in that case, I'm using color just as a way to organize and to create like a mental map of what my model is looking like. Okay, maybe I'll talk a little bit about what's happening here. So yeah, I've imported it, and there's a little baking you have to do. Basically, Substance Painter has to kind of figure out, this is the top, this is the bottom, these are the dimensions. It'll create some ambient occlusion. It'll bake it right in, and then you can just add your materials. When something is like a separate element and not attached to anything else, for example, this tree trunk, you can just paint it with a click button. Those are some handy features. So here I'm just adding a bunch of colors. Here I'm switching to the 2D view. So here you just have a 2D view of your UV map. Sometimes it's much handier to be painting on a 2D layout than on the 3D model. And sometimes the painting on a 3D model is what you would like. Yeah, here I'm just throwing some colors around and seeing what works. I'm adding some gradients. So as I said, these are not going to be super realistic materials, kind of stylized. And here I'm adding some emissive materials to that little plant right there. No, I'll just skip to this. Yeah, some science fiction-y looking textures and colors there. Let me see what I had there. Yeah, for example, these rocks, you can see I just painted in some simple splotches or some simple dots, red dots. Also, then added the height map and added like a negative height map, so it automatically becomes a little dense in the stone. And I really love the way you can kind of experiment with substance, and it's non-destructive. So you just have the same way you have in Photoshop, you have layers on top of layers, you have masks, you have the ability to group things. So yeah, you don't it stays very modular, and you can very quickly try out things, which is great. So yeah, here I'm kind of at the end of this. I'm about to export the textures. So the model I already have, of course, because I exported it earlier from 3ds Max, and that's the model that's going into Unity. Now it's just a question of exporting the textures. Substance built in a bunch of different platforms you can build. You can export your textures to, like Unity, like Unreal, a whole bunch of other platforms where you can export your textures to. So mine are going to be exported for Unity. And then I have a quick video just to show that last part of that process, importing the assets into Unity. So here I have the 3D model, and underneath are all the textures that I've exported for all these assets. So there's an albedo, there's an emission, there's a metallic smoothness, and there's a normal. That's kind of what you get when you're exporting for what they call PBR, physically based reflection materials for Unity. I have the model, and I'm about to put it in the scene. Of course, it comes in because I exported this one from 3ds Max with the pink material. I just add the texture to it, and it automatically creates a material, and that material is for all these assets. So all these assets just have one draw call, so that's super important. Now, and what I do then is I go into Unity, and then I start to move and copy these assets around. And these assets got placed in this bigger project I made at the time, where I think there's a bunch of trees and plants, all kind of selections and sets that all have one material. So I think this whole scene in total isn't more than probably between 8 to 10 draw calls, which is which is very nice. And I got a lot of feedback from people in VR chat, because a lot of worlds in VR chat are not really that optimized, and still have a lot of draw calls. And people mentioned to me that they could feel the frame rate being very nice, so they could sense that was as a very optimized scene, while still having I would think a high quality in terms of visuals. And that's the funny thing, is that a lot of people think that some people only think things can look really good if you have like a lot of textures, and but this workflow, this gravity sketch substance painter workflow can give you high-end looking stuff, but still be very optimized in terms of poly count, as I mentioned earlier, and draw calls, which is really the two things you have to focus on. I'm just doing some quick light baking in Unity, and as I mentioned, when I import the model, I don't hit the check mark that says auto create light UVs, because it already has UVs. And if you don't do that, it'll automatically pick up the UVs that I created earlier, also for the lighting, if that makes sense. So that's, even in terms of that, it's very clean, and you might see some seams if you go into the scene and you look for them. So here I'm doing some light baking. And it's very simple, just a directional light with some about 4 bounces. A lot of people ask me what's my secret sauce when it comes to lighting. It's like, well, there isn't any. Like, keep your lighting settings as basic as it is, and it's the assets and it's this design of your work that's gonna create a scene. So yeah, this is basically the scene in Unity. And as I mentioned, you can find it, you can download it as an executable on my site, so you can walk around on it. If you're on VR chat, you can also find it there. It's actually called Shelter in Place, because I made it during the whole start of the Corona outbreak. yeah, so this is kind of the Unity workflow part. People can check them out and see it more in detail. But this is kind of a quick run through of a project.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's like super impressive. A lot of things I actually didn't know too much about, but I've been hearing from like Daniel, our CTO, like, oh, you need to have, you know, this material atlasing, or essentially what you were showing, like having the one image, so it pulls all the materials from one single file. But hearing it come from you, it makes a lot more sense now, kind of, or seeing it from the workflow as well.
Cool. Cool.
I have a question about the work that you have on our site. You have a small example on our site, and it seems that you've done a lot of these little prototypes or quick case studies. And for me, that's quite interesting, because it almost feels like you're testing out mini workflows and having a little bit of fun at the same time. Can you kind of walk us through some of that work that you, especially the earlier stuff that I started seeing on Twitter when you were first starting to experiment with the tool and bringing it into Substance? And the key thing I'm interested in is it felt like you were testing Gravity Sketch more than testing Substance. So you kind of already knew that you were going to be able to get something on the back end of Substance, but you were almost like, one time I'd see you pull a mannequin, another time, especially like this strange vehicle thing that you have here, where you brought a very old image in and then you tried to see if you can recreate it. What was your process in approaching different workflows and like getting started in the tool, and where, if maybe now is a good time to transition, it's like, where did you find some of the challenges as well?
Well, I think that for me, one of the things I was immediately very happy about when I opened Gravity Sketch is to find that mannequin, actually, because that's just something that's very nice to have, and it really speeds things up, just to being able to pose that and to kind of work over that, as I did for that image that's on your website. Which one is it? Oh yeah, it's this one, the shaman. So yeah, I was kind of trying things like that out, but for the most part, I don't even feel like I was experimenting that much with Gravity Sketch as much I was just experimenting with creating new shapes, because as we mentioned earlier, the first time you transition from your flat screen to 3D, actual 3D, VR, you're trying to do the things you already knew how to do, but now you want to do them in VR. Kind of how a lot of early VR games were just ports from existing games to VR. But it starts to become interesting when you realize all the stuff you couldn't do before, and then the new ideas you're getting. So it's hard for me to really explain it very rationally, because for me it's really just opening it up and getting started. And once I knew kind of what I could do with Gravity Sketch, especially when the subdivision modeling and the got added, was like, there's this image like this from Möbius, which is of course a well-known artist. I love him very much. And when I saw this image, immediately I was like, oh, I could make that in Gravity Sketch. I mean, it'd be super hard for me to do something like this in 3ds Max, because I really have to like interpret how thick this, I mean, I don't have a lot to go on. There's not a lot of glossiness on this model to show me kind of what are the dimensions, how flat is it, how wide is it. So I thought it was a good challenge. So I started to do this in Gravity Sketch, and a big part of the workflow is actually also on my YouTube channel, which I streamed. But I was pretty happy with the results. There were some errors later on, and I discovered some scaling things that could have been better. But yeah, this is a good example of a model that I really don't see myself creating in any other software. I got a lot of like sculpting software in VR, but you just couldn't work precisely enough. You've got some like low poly modeling tools, for example, like Google Blocks, but you could never make something like this because it's still archaic. So Gravity Sketch is very good in that in between, like where it's still, I don't know, solid shapes, but it's still organic. So it's not it's not a wonder that it works so well for industrial design or like modern kinds of architecture. So that's really, yeah, that's, and kind of Gravity Sketch has now also kind of focused my interest more into an area um, like vehicles, stuff like I didn't really do before. I got very interested in that.
What I find interesting about what you just said is you said precision, and somehow some of the other tools don't give you that level of precision. Can you elaborate a little bit on what precision in Gravity Sketch, how you interpret that, what that means?
Yeah, well, for me, it's because I still like to move vertices around with my hand. I mean, there are some precision tools in Gravity Sketch I sometimes use, like being able to slide over a certain axis and stuff like that. But for me, the precision is actually being able to take a vertices and actually put it in a certain spot. And that's not an evident feature of many VR tools. So yeah, just being able to move it around and see where it kind of lands. That's kind of the precision part.
That's cool. I really like that. I guess we should probably leave a little bit of time for you to give us, what are your favorite features of Gravity Sketch that you use religiously, and also where can we improve? What does your wish list look like?
Yeah,
there's been a big update recently, but we're looking at where to next focus our energy, and it's always good to hear from our users like where they think that the tool could improve, especially to help key elements of their workflow. So
yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so yeah, it goes without saying that I really love the modeling software. So I would just want to say it. I think you've already done an amazing job in creating something very unique. What I love is the subdivision modeling tool. As I mentioned, I use, that's basically all I use. Sometimes, of course, with the symmetry mode. Those are kind of obvious features. I love the mannequin, and I would also think that I'd love to be able to change the proportions of the mannequin. So if I could change the scale of the head or change the length or scale of the limbs, I could see it actually, because I think Gravity Sketch could be a big part of the workflow of like animation studios. And like character design, and I think these are also things that are very interesting to do in Gravity Sketch. I wrote some of these things down because I usually I'm not very good at giving this kind of feedback, because I usually just work with the features I have and I don't even about what I would want to have. So I wrote some things down. What I think I'd also be nice to have is to be able to export it without UVs. So now automatically surfaces have their own UVs, and you have to unwrap them before you use them in Substance Painter. But because as I mentioned, that auto UV creation from Substance Painter is pretty good, it would be great if people could export from a Gravity Sketch and then have some check mark where they say without UVs. So you could immediately import it in Substance Painter, because if Substance Painter detects UVs, it won't automatically create new ones. So that's kind of what I was thinking. Would be nice for a lot of people to not have that intermediate step where they have to do the post-processing in 3ds Max, because that's still kind of a hurdle, I feel, for some people. And I think it'd be good, but maybe this is already part of it. I don't remember it, is to being able to turn culling on and off. So the surfaces just usually, when you export a Gravity Sketch model to Unity, like a plane only has one visible side. The back side is like invisible. Gravity Sketch viewport still has like two-sided rendering. So it'd be nice to be able to turn that off just as a last check before you export your model, because that's the stuff you usually have to fix in 3ds Max or in some other 3D software.
That one we did. It's Daniel here. We did just fix that one, or at least we have a first version of a fix for that in the latest update that went out yesterday.
Okay.
On the tool belt, there's a tool that you can grab, and when you grab it, it will make every object in the scene render single-sided, and you can go over to them and click on them to flip which side their normals are on. So you can.
Oh wow! Okay.
It's definitely not perfect yet, and it's very laggy because it regenerates the meshes for the whole scene. But we are working on improving it, but we do at least have something that already works.
Okay. Oh, that's super cool to hear. I'll check that out. Yeah, I haven't been able to check out the new update yet, but I'll do that this weekend. And there's this other thing, but I kind of imagine that you maybe already have done that in this update, is to add to a selection. So making selections of vertices, now you have to do it in one go, but to be able to additively add to that selection. But I did remember somebody saying that you guys were working on that. So that's the only gripe I have, I think, now with Gravity Sketches, to make good selections and being able to take some vertices out of a certain selection set you already have. Yeah, that could really help. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. Yeah, what I wanted to mention, because you also gave me access to the co-sketch feature, and I've been using it with a friend of mine, Daniel Beauchamp. He works over at Shopify. We've had some very good brainstorming sessions in that. And I'm working also with some other people where we are looking to see if we can use what would art therapy look like in VR. And we thought that having a coach feature where you can maybe have like a counselor or maybe just several people working together on something. It's very early stages, but we had some very promising first experience with that. Yeah, I really think that co-sketch feature is very important for future workflows, and I'm really looking forward to working with more people in the future. I'm working on an animation, a teaser for an animation at the moment, and I'm making the surroundings, and I'm rendering it in Unity, and I'm also using Gravity Sketch for that. And already several moments I was like, I would love to be able to get the creative director and the animator inside a co-sketch and look at the scene in VR, and just grab an object and just kind of role play, through that in a very like simple way. It's a very good way to do like interactive, like storyboarding, or how would you call it? Play out certain scenes and check out dimensions, and actually placing a camera in Gravity Sketch was also a feature that I like. So you understand what the framing is going to be. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that feature. I think it has a lot of potential also for people working in animation and those kind of pipelines. Yeah, I think that's kind of the most of the feedback that I would have on Gravity Sketch at the moment.
Well, we're super inspired by you and all the other creators in the community, and just we wouldn't be as far as we are, or even as passionate as we have been about building the solution, if we didn't have folks like you that were kind of pushing the limits of what our software is, and or even making us question where our software could go and how it can get to that place. So we really do value this time as well, and even for those of you on the call and people that may see this later, Durks have been sharing things even via chats and Twitter, or sub chats and DMs and Instagram. So it's a conversation that's actually been happening for quite some time now, and it continues to happen. And you, along with a lot of other people that have pretty great industry and domain experience, have really helped guide us in a lot of ways, or at least help reinforce some of the ideas and decisions that we've been making. So I just want to thank you for that as well.